All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel. This time for a very special Black Friday edition. Las Vegas Raiders and the Kansas City Chiefs. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. In this video, live stream, live Q&A, you guys will drive the show. I will talk about the injuries that impact the slate, and both running back rooms are of extreme importance for this showdown slate. We will talk about low risk lineup construction tips, and I'm not sure that definition even fits for this showdown slate based on some of the variables we have in play. And then we'll talk about probably why most of you are here, how to win the biggest prizes that DraftKings and FanDuel have to offer for this specific showdown slate. Now, this is a live Q&A. If you have questions throughout the show, go ahead and throw them in the chat to the right of the screen, and I will answer them as the show progresses. We'll be here for probably 30 minutes or so, maybe a little less, depending on the number of questions that we get. But either way, we appreciate you tuning in. You have a lot of potential options to spend your time today on Black Friday, and spending it here with us at Occupy. We certainly appreciate that. So let's talk about the injuries, and let's just get right into it, and let's talk about this backfield situation for both teams. So let's start with Kansas City. Isaiah Pacheco had the fractured fibula, was placed on injured reserve earlier in the season. He returned to practice a couple of weeks ago, finally was activated this week, and he will play today. And the biggest question we all have, both as DFS players, as content creators, as ownership projectors, as fantasy point projectors, is how this workload split will pan out for the Chiefs. And I don't have a crystal ball. I know a lot of you tune in for me to have the exact answers. Sometimes we play a game with incomplete information, and this is one of those situations where we do not know what will happen. We can give our best guess. We can try to predict what the field is going to do. We can try to predict what the Chiefs are going to do, and we can make the best decisions possible with that information. So Pacheco obviously was a top 5 round draft pick for us in fantasy leagues preseason. Did pretty well, 15 plus fantasy points in both games before getting injured late in that Cincinnati game in week 2. Kareem Hunt has been, I would call it, relatively underwhelming. Yes, had a couple 17 and 20 point games here, but he's actually completely underperformed his opportunity. You look at expected fantasy points compared to actual fantasy points, and he hasn't really gotten it done. I know the fantasy point totals are there in some of these weeks, but I'm sure the Chiefs are aware of this as well. And on a short week, against a divisional opponent, I'm not sure they would activate Pacheco and just give him a handful of touches. And maybe they do, but it's really tough to know. It's really, really tough to know. Let's look at the pricing on both sides. And I prefer this type of setup. We've talked about this type of situation a few times this season where there's an unknown situation, or maybe there's an injured player and DraftKings or FanDuel just completely drops the ball in the pricing. I would much prefer pricing like this where they're basically the same price and expensive. Pacheco 9,200 on DraftKings, Kareem Hunt 9K, as opposed to one of them being 9K and the other being 4K, or both being 4K, and we end up with this crazy ownership discrepancy. I would much rather it be here and force us and the field to make a tough decision in terms of how they're going to play this backfield. If we look at FanDuel decided to do the same thing. Kareem Hunt, $14,000. Isaiah Pacheco, $14,500. And right now, our projected ownership, let's bring it up, occupyfantasy.com. This is our Occupy model. We updated our ownership this morning. We will probably do another run once inactives are released or if we get any news. But if we sort by DraftKings flex position, we have Pacheco at just 13% on DraftKings and Kareem Hunt at 21%. And that's basically the same idea on FanDuel where we have, let me make sure you guys can see this. Yes, Pacheco 24% on FanDuel, Kareem Hunt 29%, and just a handful of captain ownership or MVP ownership for each. Right now, we have Hunt projected higher in terms of ownership. And I think the biggest reason is he's been doing it. Pacheco's coming off the injury, and he's a little bit cheaper. You get the price savings. Not that that plays a huge factor on this slate, but it does play a factor. And if you just Twitter search both these guys' names, all the betting touts that we love making fun of on Twitter, they're all hammering Kareem Hunt overs. They're not really playing Isaiah Pacheco overs, which leads us to believe that casual players will probably be playing Kareem Hunt overs as well, therefore playing Kareem Hunt in DFS. So I guess the safer play is Kareem Hunt, but it's not really safe by any means. And if you're looking for the lower owned, higher upside play, the actual better talent, it is Pacheco, and we get him at lower ownership, so he's probably the better tournament play there. Let's see what questions we got in the chat. Oh, we got some crazy ones already. Let's talk about the Las Vegas backfield, and then we will answer these questions here. Now, on Las Vegas side, Zamir White has been ruled out with his quad injury. Alexander Madison, who has basically taken over this backfield from Zamir White since the first week of the season, He did not play last week, but he got in 3 straight limited practices this week with his ankle injury. Unfortunately for us, Las Vegas has probably the worst set of beat reporters in the league and perhaps in professional sports. They just don't report anything of actual value. Therefore, we don't know if Alexander Mattison is playing. And again, the game starts in 2 hours. We don't know. If you guys see something while we are live here for the next 25 minutes, let me know in the chat, and that way we can rearrange and reanalyze everything that we know. Basically, I will lay out the 2 situations, and we'll talk about it from there. So if Mattison does play, he's probably healthy enough to lead, and he will be the preferred running back in this backfield. On DraftKings, he is $6,200. On FanDuel, Alexander Mattison is $9,500. So pretty cheap for a starting running back by FanDuel standards and by DraftKings standards, because DraftKings doesn't know, and they decided not to price any of these guys. And that's fine. I would prefer this situation again. While they're not as expensive as they probably should be, there is some unknown situations, and they're like 13-point underdogs, so it's fine. Meanwhile, while Madison and White were out last week, Amir Abdullah, a career high in snap usage, 90% of the snaps he played last week, scored the touchdown, obviously, which had a lot of people excited for playing him, scored 17.5 DFS points. But all of his value mostly came in the passing game, 6 targets, right? And there was one beat reporter that said that Sincere McCormick, who, shout out to Sincere, who helped me win some preseason GPPs in the past, would get an expanded role today, which I think, again, and then maybe that's just going out on a limb from this beat reporter, but it does speak to the truth that this coaching staff, and basically any coaching staff, has not wanted to give a huge workload to Amir Abdullah. Now a veteran, mostly a special teams guy, they don't want to give him 90% of the snaps again. So if Alexander Madison is back, I see Amir Abdullah in just a passing down role, complimentary role. And if he is, and if Madison is out, I don't think Abdullah sees 90% of the snaps once again. Maybe it's 60, 70, maybe 80, but enough for McCormick to be of value, especially on the showdown slate where he's just $800 on DraftKings. We're not going to need his value over on FanDuel, and I'll tell you about that in a second. But it is a fluid situation. So right now I'm leaning Madison in. Our projected ownership has Alexander Madison in, and we have him around. We have all these guys under 20%. If Madison is out, expect both Abdullah and probably McCormick as well on DraftKings to exceed that 20% ownership mark. All right, let's get through these questions here. Let's see what we got. All right, we hit the Pacheco situation. We hit the Madison situation. Got a throwback Rich Gannon. Back when I was first playing fantasy, had a Rich Gannon on my team. He was a beast fantasy quarterback. So no, I don't think he'll throw for more than 300 yards today, but he probably could throw for more yards than Aiden O'Connell if Rich Gannon was starting for today at 50 years old or however old he is. Andrew's asking Noah Gray captain. No, Noah Gray is completely overperforming his expectations. His price is up now. Probably maybe not as high as it should be, but $3,600. Expected to have scored 12 fantasy points in the last couple of weeks. It's almost 30. So Noah Gray, yes, he's getting more run. Not sure I'd play him at captain though, especially on this slate where we don't need that. Wig says, I know you're saying low risk contests are not recommended, but do you think that a low risk lineup with both quarterbacks and both running backs and backup running back viable for low risk? All right, so let's talk about it. Thank you for the professional transition there, Wig. So shout out to our writer Chuck, by the way, who he's on the West Coast, and he got up before the sunrise today to put the daily plug up on the site today. So shout out to Chuck. We appreciate you. An incredible plug because there's a lot of intricacies and strategy to this slate. And Chuck put the plug together. You see him on the NBA shows. So shout out to Chuck for that. His recommendation in the plug is don't play low risk contests today. And I understand it because let's go through it and I'll show you what I mean. So typically we try to play both quarterbacks and both running backs when there are no split backfields, when we have workhorses, and we play any obvious values. So we try to do this, right? We play Mahomes, we play Aiden O'Connell. Do we play Pacheco or Hunt? I don't know. They're probably both overpriced, so I don't think we could play either one, despite being 13-point favorites. That makes it really tough. I guess you could pick one, but this is why it's not a low-risk strategy whatsoever. Now, if Madison's in, we probably play Madison. If he's out, we play Abdullah. So 62, 58, depending on who's in. Let's just assume Madison's in for now. Now we have 6,200 left for a player. We're not going to play these running backs. We're probably going to play Bowers and Kelsey. No, we can't do that. Just Bowers, probably not as 13-point underdogs. Kelsey, I guess we're considering 2 tight ends in a low-risk build. $4,600. Pretty tough. By the way, I know we didn't talk about this injury in the earlier part of the show, but Gardner Minshew is on injured reserve. Aiden O'Connell is back. He will start today for the Raiders. And then at kicker, And maybe we get some lower ownership just because of the little chaos here in the player pool. But Harrison Butker's on injured reserve, and then Spencer Strader, who they signed to replace him, he is also hurt. So they signed Matthew Wright to the practice squad. Matthew Wright, remember, kicked for the 49ers earlier this year when they needed one. A pretty solid kicker for a guy off the street, a guy we would trust. And at 5K on a 13-point favorite is a guy we really want to target. And just fingers crossed we get a little bit lower ownership than we project because of the unknown name and the unknown situation with the Chiefs kicker. However, FanDuel dropped the ball, and Matthew Wright is not in the player pool. And speaking of dropping the ball, they made Aiden O'Connell the minimum price on FanDuel. It's not hard. Have one person check this. I don't understand. Why is he the minimum price? Why is the kicker not in the player pool? These things should not be a thing. I know it's FanDuel we're dealing with, but these things should not be happening on a weekly basis. And it gets me fired up. But it's just people are putting real money on the line, and we have to deal with a min-price quarterback who's starting. It just makes no sense. So it makes an extreme situation. We had this just yesterday with Drew Lock, who was $5,000 on FanDuel. And if you played that contest, you'll have a much better idea of how to play this contest. It's pretty insane. So if we try to do it on FanDuel, again, we're not sure which KC running back to play. Hell, we maybe just play both. You play O'Connell, who opens up everything. You should consider O'Connell in basically every contest. Playing 150 lineups, I wouldn't even be mad if you played him in 150 yourself at 5K. But there's some leverage, obviously. He's going to be 50% plus owned in high-risk contests to fade an O'Connell and hoping he scores 4, 5, 6 points, and then one of these other cheaper guys get there. But so who do we play next? Madison, if he's in, I guess. 95. We can't play a kicker, Matthew Wright. We have 14-7 left. The one thing you'll find out on FanDuel, salary is fake on this slate. O'Connell should be priced at 11,000 plus, probably 12,000. That means any lineup conceivably can leave is $7,000 less expensive than it should be with O'Connell. So basically lower your min salary on FanDuel. You're going to have to check your lineups after you build them, especially if you use our lineup builder or any lineup optimizer, to make sure that your lineups make sense. But you can leave a ton of money on the table. And if you use Patrick Mahomes at MVP in high-risk contests, we have him projected 60% plus, which may be a record. He's going to get 70, 80% in some contests at MVP. So if you're going to play Patrick Mahomes, you're going to have to leave a ton more salary. You're going to have to use some low-owned players. It's a very tough slate. It's a very tricky slate. More often than not, these slates do not work out for us because it ends up in just a heavy dupe fest, tons of duplicates. The most obvious lineup wins because the pricing is so bad. However, in the, 10 to 20% of the time that is not a situation like that, we have a very good chance at a unique winner, which is pretty rare on FanDuel to say because we end up leaving a lot of salary, an obvious chalk pieces misses, or a lower owned player and a lower price player outscores a stud that no one would expect. So if that speaks to you, if that's right up your alley, then this would be the type of FanDuel slate that you play. All right, let's see. To answer Wake's question, you could do it. I guess it's viable. It just feels very unsafe, and I'm not even sure what the field is going to do in low-risk contests, which is the number one thing that we should be aware of, and we can't even really do that today. Kai says he was in first place, second place, third place, and part of fourth place for $181,000 the other day, and they ended up with $400 at the end of the game. Yeah, that's the trials and tribulations of showdown slates. I feel for you. I've been there before, and that sucks. But just makes you want to get to the top even more in the future. So let's try to get it back today, Kai. Baby Joker says defense or Hopkins as captain. So let's talk about these two guys in general. Let's talk about the defense, and let's talk about the captains. So just two insane data points here. The Chiefs are $6,800. $6,800. This is not a typo. They're $6,800. We were making fun of the Texans the other night. They were $6,200. Obviously, they were optimal at $6,200 because why not? Chiefs are $6,800. This might be the most expensive defense I've ever seen. That's insane. But they are playing Aiden O'Connell, the 13-point favorites, and we have a lot of uncertainty at other positions. The Chiefs could easily end up as an optimal player at $6,800 as a defense. Don't rule it out. On FanDuel, I would be shocked if they're not over 20%. Our projected ownership has 18% right now. I think they get over 20%, especially without Matthew Wright, the kicker, in the player pool. But I've never seen this before. Like, literally, I've never seen this. In our model, it is Patrick Mahomes by a wide margin. And then the Kansas City defense is the number 2 ranked play, salary adjusted on FanDuel in our model, which, again, defenses never rank inside the top 5 usually. Never second. Never above the other quarterback. Never above. It goes to show how crazy of a slate it is on FanDuel, and our model's picking up on it. Chiefs defense certainly in play. And if they're going to be 4% MVP and Patrick Mahomes is 60%, I think it's worth a dart throw in case this is a low-scoring game or somehow Kansas City gets a defensive touchdown or two. And as far as Hopkins goes, Baby Joker, Hopkins saw his playing time decrease last week. And I think a lot of people were left scratching their head against Carolina. Ran the fourth most routes for Kansas City. Obviously, still got the touchdown, so his box score wasn't that bad. And a lot of people were wondering, why is Hopkins not playing that much? Why is Juju Smith-Schuster and why is Justin Watson playing more than DeAndre Hopkins? The answer, as most of the time it ends up being when we can't figure out playing time, is money related or picks trade related. We know the Giants didn't want to start Drew Lock because the incentives in his contract, so they started Tommy DeVito, and until they didn't have a choice, they had to start Drew Lock yesterday. DeAndre Hopkins, because of the trade they made with the Titans, if Hopkins plays less than 60% of snaps this regular season, the Chiefs have to give up a lower draft pick. If he plays more, they have to give up a higher draft pick. So I think they can disguise it as veteran rest. Let's keep this guy fresh for the playoffs. But they can also be very smart and keep him under that 60% number so they don't have to give a higher draft pick to the Titans as a result of that trade. So 1 week blip, that could be the case. It could fluctuate week to week, but at least we have some sort of concrete evidence as to why that happened. And it lowers his ceiling a little bit as a result. So I'm not sure I would play. I prefer Xavier Worthy at captain. I know we all get frustrated when he's dropping passes and looks like he should have touchdowns but doesn't. He's slightly underperforming, not necessarily on our underperforming wide receiver list, but I would prefer him over Hopkins at captain today in high-risk contests. All right. Who is the best low-owned play you like for FanDuel? Shout out to Kai or KI. Let's see here. Let's pull up the model. And let's sort by FanDuel Flex ownership. And again, I will include the Chiefs defense as popular. Best low-owned options, Daniel Carlson, 12% because we don't need the salary today and no one's looking to play a 13-point underdog kicker. He's extremely intriguing. Trey Tucker, wildly popular on DraftKings, not nearly as popular on FanDuel, just 12%. He's probably my favorite play of the group. Amir Abdul is 4% if Madison is active, and that's what our 4% ownership projection has factored in. Then there's a chance that they split carries, and Abdullah at 4% could be extremely interesting. But I think for your answer, I would say Tucker at 12%, a guy who runs a ton of routes, got stopped at the one last week, clearly electric. So I think Trey Tucker would be the best low-owned play on FanDuel. Dustin says, who are the most popular cash plays? On DraftKings, we got Mahomes, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, Aiden O'Connell, Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, Matthew Wright as our top projected owned plays on DraftKings according to our Occupy model and our projected ownership. Freight says, why not take Bowers? Vegas is going to have to throw the ball, and Bowers will be the main target. He easily sees 15 targets today. I agree. He should be one of the top plays today. He's one of the top owned plays. He's one of the top projected plays. Totally agree. And if you're looking for a reason how Mahomes doesn't end up as the optimal captain, it's probably one of the tight ends. And even on FanDuel, where you get insane leverage. Let's talk about FanDuel just really quickly. I know a lot of you don't play FanDuel, but a lot of you do. Basically, you have to either lock Mahomes in all your lineups and try to get as many different combinations with him as you can, or fade him at 65% MVP and play Kelce, Bowers, the running backs, defenses, and hope that Mahomes doesn't throw 2-3 touchdowns and end up as the optimal MVP. Now, I'm a glutton for punishment. I think that would be the route I would go and not play Mahomes at MVP in large field GPPs on FanDuel. And even DraftKings, we have his projected ownership at what? 38% at captain? That's crazy for a non-running quarterback. So, yes, as dangerous as it is, it seems like Mahomes is the fade at captain and MVP for high-risk contests, unless you want to lock him into all your lineups. So you have a very good understanding of how to get different with him, how to play low-owned plays, how to leave salary in a game like this. Big Top Dog's asking about Pacheco. Yeah, scroll back to the top of the show, the first 5 minutes or so. Top Dog, we talked about the Pacheco Hunt situation, so dove pretty deep there. Justin's asking about Pacheco's captain and his ownership. Pacheco, we have, let's sort by DraftKings Flex. We have Pacheco at just 3% captain on DraftKings, 13% flex. So if you believe, and we get no pregame reports to lead us one direction or the other, that's a lot of upside if he's back to a full-time role. It's a big if, but 3% captain back to a full-time role for Pacheco, I think it is a shot you can take in high-risk contests. So I do like that call, Justin. The boy from Cali says, how much do props determine your lineups? Basically none. That's already factored into most things, most projections, most salaries. So we use props basically 0%. I do, at least. Maybe some people here watching do. But our model takes all that into account. So I don't use props at all. Micah says he 100% thought he would have the same lineup, but he was wrong based on these comments. Michael, what are you thinking? I'd like to hear what kind of lineup you think. You don't have to get your whole lineup, but maybe what's one place that you're different, or the people in the comments are different that you aren't looking at. I would love to hear, because again, if there's a slate where you're not in tune with what other people are thinking, that's a big advantage. Wick says, do we know the extent of O'Connell's wrist injury? Was the likelihood Ritter plays? I think O'Connell had a hand or a finger. I can't remember exactly what it was. But I guess it is possible that Desmond Ritter plays, who played last week. Let's see what Ritter's price is. 86. It is possible, but again, their season's kind of lost. And the way it sounded, they would not activate him if he wasn't fully ready. They would just play Ritter. They signed him, traded for him. So if O'Connell's ready, I think he's good to go. So maybe he gets benched for poor performance late in the game, but I don't think it's an injury related thing. It seems like he's fully healthy in terms of his injury that he sustained. All right, guys, 9 minutes. Let's get final questions in here. I think we covered a good chunk so far. It's a really interesting slate, a really tough slate, a really salary sensitive slate. Salary insensitive? Yeah, salary insensitive, because salary doesn't matter that much on this slate. So let's do a quick poll. We got 211 people watching. Go ahead and type in the chat. Do you prefer Hunt or Pacheco today? Let's get a quick rundown. This is a very unscientific poll, but answer right now in the chat. Do you prefer Hunt or Pacheco today? Or who do you think scores more fantasy points? Chino says, Chiefs D at captain. Yeah, I think it's possible, dude. As much as I would hate to play a defense at captain, especially when it's $6,800 on DraftKings, our model's telling us that that's actually a good move today. So I'm not going to hate it. All right, we will tally up this Hunt versus Pacheco. Raja says, can you put your best lineup on DraftKings? No, we don't give individual lineups. That's against the terms and conditions of DraftKings. You got to figure it out yourself using the information that we give you. Oh, wow, we're getting a lot in here. Okay, let's see. Some people are saying play them both, and that is an option because absolutely no one, except for you sharps in the chat, are going to play both these guys, right? You're going to play one or the other at their price tags. So here's the thing. If you do play both, I think the only two ways it works is if you play both Pacheco and Hunt without Mahomes, because they get all the scoring for the most part, or you play a Chiefs onslaught. You play 5 Chiefs and just 1 Raider because the Chiefs dominate this game. Both running backs get there. Not many Raiders get there. So I think that those are 2 ways you can play it. Certainly possible. A little tough with their price tags, but I think that's the way you would have to play it. All right, let's see. We got Hunt, Pacheco, Freight going off the board with P. Ryan. Very nice. Pacheco, Hunt, Pacheco, Hunt, Pacheco, Pacheco, Hunt, Pacheco, Hunt. That's what I'm saying, dude. It's very 50-50. Look across the industry, in which we do. We do checkups on industry sites to see how they're projecting guys all over the board. Some sites have Pacheco higher, some have Hunt higher, some are cowards and put them directly even. I won't name any names. But, yeah, no one knows. That's the fun of it. No one knows. And Eddie has said right captain twice. So, Eddie, I hope that works for you. We have Matthew Wright less than 1% captain ownership. So, again, I'm not sure you need it. I'm not sure you need a mid-range captain today. It's not like some of these other slates where we got to jam in studs. The studs are very volatile today. All right, guys, 7 minutes. Let's get any final questions in. Let's just go through individual players. Guys we haven't touched on yet. Maybe values on DraftKings. All right, we hit on all these guys. Jacoby Myers, obviously. Well, we have the issue with O'Connell at quarterback compared to Gardner Minshew. But Jacoby Myers getting a ton of targets in this offense without Devontae Adams there anymore. So Xavier Worthy leading the team in routes and underperforming slightly. Not a technical underperforming wide receiver, but we like him here. We talked about the Raiders running backs. We talked about Matthew Wright. Trey Tucker we talked about as an obvious value that will be popular, that is electric. Juju, no one's going to play him, but he did run the 3rd most routes last week on this team and got a red zone target. So he's interesting, especially if you play Mahomes captain. We're looking for ways to get different with Mahomes captain and MVP lineups. Low-owned receivers is a great avenue for that. Juju qualifies, less than 5% ownership. Noah Gray will be 10 times more popular here. Raiders defense, not a soul is playing the Raiders defense today. Are you? 3% ownership. Another way to get different here. Justin Watson ran a ton of routes. DJ Turner running a ton of routes as well. It's basically they're running 3 guys, 90% plus of the routes for the Raiders, and DJ Turner is one of those 3. Hardman will get a couple snaps. Michael Mayer, 20 routes last week. 5 targets in his last 2 games? No one's going to play him at $1,600 really. So he's an interesting option. if we can get a couple targets. Again, not a slate where we need to jam studs and punt a low-owned guy, a low salary guy like Michael Mayer. But if you're building a lineup that way, he can certainly fit. And then Sincere McCormick, only if Alexander Madison is out does he become viable. Did not run a route last week, but 5 carries, 33 yards, helped me win, I think it was $50K in preseason DFS. So certainly partial to him. $800, he would certainly become in play. Anything else? Nah, we're good down here. Yeah, Justin says, do you have a projection on Noah Gray's flex ownership? Yeah, and if you guys have access to ActiveFantasy.com, as low as $7 a week gets you access to all sports. We have projected ownership for all the primetime showdown slates. Noah Gray, we have at 26%, so not going under the radar by any means. He's going to be extremely popular, especially after scoring 2 touchdowns last week. So Noah Gray, one of the most popular values on the slate. All right, good question here from Daniel Spider. I don't know if that's what the abbreviation is. DNL SPDR. I'm going to go Daniel Spider. Let me know if that's not it. What's the most salary you would leave on the table on FanDuel for GPP? I keep ending up with about 5,000. 5,000, totally fine. And here's how I would look at this. Right? Let's build a lineup. These are 2 ways. And again, I talked about this in how to build NFL Showdown lineups video. It's like an hour and a half long. It might not help you for this slate, but if you haven't watched it already, I tagged it at the beginning of this video. I'll tag it at the end. But it's also in the description below and it's on our channel. But basically an hour and a half of how I build showdown lineups. And there is a section in there on how to tell if you leave too much salary on the table. So that'll be extremely important. But basically what I would do is this. Let's just build a random lineup. I love how they made Ritter 13,000, but not, or 12,000, but not O'Connell. All right. So let's just put O'Connell in. Right. Okay. Let's take Pacheco out. And basically, the 2 ways you would do it is if O'Connell was priced appropriately, what would he be? And based on Ritter's pricing, we would assume FanDuel would have priced him at $12,000. So any lineup with O'Connell, you can leave at least $7,000 left on the table. If he performs up to expectations and is in the optimal lineup, that's one way. The other way is if you leave enough salary on the table, let's say Worthy here. Now we have, let's leave a little more actually. Let's leave, let's put Juju in, for example. Now we have 7,000 left over, and we need to ask ourselves, is this too much left on the table? What we can do is we can add $7,000 to every player's pricing and ask ourselves, is it realistic that this player outscores every player in between that range? So for instance, O'Connell, he's a quarterback. We know he can. Kelsey, stud. Bauer, stud. The question is Juju. Can Juju outscore every player between 7,500 and 14,500? So if we look, that means the defenses, it means Daniel Carlson, Noah Gray. He can outscore those guys with a touchdown. That's easy. We get to the Raiders running backs. It's murky. He can outscore those guys with a touchdown. Xavier Worthy, he can drop some balls. He can outscore him. Then we start to get tricky. Can he outscore Jacoby Myers, DeAndre Hopkins, and the Chiefs running backs? Now it becomes more unlikely, and it's probably a play you're only going to do in large field GPPs. It's possible, very, very unlikely, but that's how I would tell myself how much salary can I leave on the table on this slate. So 5,000 for instance is perfectly enough because O'Connell's only 5K. I played Tucker with O'Connell earlier in the season. He didn't get a target almost the entire game. Could that happen again? Certainly could happen again. Anything can happen. We can't predict exactly how these games are going to go. Our median projection is more than 0 targets. That's what we expect, but range of outcomes, he could end up with 10. He could end up with 0 just based on how the game goes. So people were asking about Sincere McCormick, thinking he will still have a role. I mean, he had 5 touches last week in a game where only Amir Abdullah played. So unless you guys have read something or you believe that he's more talented than all 3 of these guys, or coaches said something, I mean, I agree. I think that especially if Madison's out, McCormick's worth a shot at $800, and even when he's in, he's worth a shot at 800 in large field GPPs. It's just that we don't need the salary today. That's the only thing, right? If he rushes for 5 for 33 like he did last week in an almost best case scenario, his 3.3 points aren't really helpful on this slate because we're not jamming in 5 studs. So that's the only issue with playing guys like McCormick and Michael Mayer today on DraftKings. All right, guys, 1:30. That'll do it for this show. Appreciate everyone watching as always. The daily plug is already up on the site, OccupyFantasy.com. Chuck, again, shout out for getting that out early this morning. His personal rankings combined with the model rankings, his slate notes, and he went really in depth on the slate notes. at 4 a.m. this morning. So go check it out for individual plays, and then lineup construction tips for individual contests on DraftKings and FanDuel. That's the most helpful part of any plug, in my opinion. I'm biased, but I think that's the most helpful part, and he did that for FanDuel and DraftKings today. The model's up. We will update ownership as soon as we get confirmation on Alexander Mattison, which should be literally any second, 90 minutes before game time. So if you guys see something, say something. Let's see these final questions. So it's Notem. Shout out Notem, one of our longest time viewers. Says Antonio Pierce, head coach, puffed up. Sincere McCormick said we need to get more touches, etc. And as Notem points out, the same thing he did with Zamir White every single week. So not necessarily indicative of getting him more touches, but I understand why people are potentially wanting to play Sincere McCormick. Final questions about Jacoby Myers. Should get a lot of targets. Big question is, can Aiden O'Connell convert them? But should be passing a ton this game, and Myers has been their top target since Devontae Adams has been traded. But he will be popular, but a great play nonetheless. So that'll do it, guys. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We'll have a main slate video, obviously, for Sunday. And then as we get into December, more and more of these Island primetime games, the Saturday 2-3 gamers, 4 gamers even for the playoffs. We'll have more videos. Subscribing is the best way to get notified when we go live here on YouTube. It's free to do so. Just click subscribe. Helps us, helps you out. Any questions, we'll be in Discord throughout the rest of the day. And good luck, and try to enjoy this Black Friday Raiders and Chiefs Showdown slate.